Someone in the early 15th century writes a poem about a long poem in instructing people how to eat the right foods during the pandemic. And he recommends eating lots of red meat and drinking alcohol and not having any fruit and vegetables, which strikes me as a very bad idea. But but other than that, there isn't really much writing about that. There just isn't. Pandemics tend not to. And then even in this, what ended up unfairly being called the Spanish flu, in 100 years ago, it was called the Spanish flu because this was the end of the First World War, and people weren't. There was lots of censorship in most countries that were affected by the Spanish flu, but not in Spain, not in neutral Spain. So Spain could publish freely articles about the pandemic, and it gave a false impression that the problem was really a Spanish problem, but actually that came from the US, probably from Kansas, and to the Western Front. I digress. But anyway, that can be seen in the background of some poems, maybe even Yeats's Second Coming, The Wasteland, some novels as well, but there's very little writing about it. How do you write about a pandemic? Normally it's a different kind of tragedy, because a war is something we do to each other, and a pandemic is something, very broadly speaking, that is done to us. We might be able to put that in the context of God, and in the past people have, but there's a commonality which is great, but maybe a bit of a suppressant for art. This pandemic seems to have had a different effect. Though time's the great sifter, and in 100 years' time, how many of the things written now about the pandemic will be read? I don't know. We'll find out. Well, we won't find out. Unless I live to be 140, which I am planning to do. But time will tell. But certainly there seems to be a lot written about it. I'm running a project called Poetry and COVID, which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. And we're publishing an anthology of poems related to COVID. We have a website with lots of submissions to that, poetryandcovid.com, and it has submissions from all over the world, and many of them, and some work of a very high quality as well. Although it's mainly our main interest with that is to bring people together. But it does so happen that a lot of poets writing work of a very high quality. I have good friends who are editors at, and I won't name any names, but some very prestigious magazines and papers in the UK, who say, I can't handle any more submissions of poems about COVID-19. I just can't.
I'd like to submit a novel on COVID written by a Korean writer. I just got you a copy.
Oh, is that one? Thank you.
It's going to be published by Restless Books in the US because I'm selling her this novel so that it can be translated into English. But anyway, please go on.
Thank you. No, and so well, that's the thing. So I think there will be. Well, I think there will be. There do seem to be changes afoot. That actually this pandemic has inspired a different sort of. And I think it's because it surprised most people so much. Pandemics in the British mentality anyway, a pandemic that keeps almost everybody indoors and that no government knows how to respond to, wasn't something that anyone thought would really happen. That happened in the past, that doesn't happen now. I know we're wrong, look, and it's a novel virus, so it can happen again. Uncertainty is good for art. And it's terrible, but an oyster needs an irritant to make a poem, and uncertainty and difficulty is often good for art. Happiness writes white, It's not really about the role of the artist at this time. I'm sorry. To actually answer the question properly, I defer to Jeff.
Oh no, I've been thinking about very similar things. The abundance of writing, that's been generated as a response to COVID-19, compared to historical precedents that seemed not to inspire us kind of similarly intense response. back in March or something like that, I went back and I kind of, it looks like we did similar things. I tried to look at, the literature that was produced, as a result of the so-called Spanish flu. And the example that I came upon was, an American novel, Pale Horse, Pale Rider by Catherine Ann Porter. And, it's a really wonderful novel. I was thinking of teaching it, but I didn't end up doing it because, it wasn't quite, anyway, there was some publication stuff. But, I was kind of amazed that, this novel that seemed to respond, so urgently to, the pandemic almost 100 years ago was published, a couple decades after, the actual events. Like I do kind of, wonder about, sometimes I especially when I see a novel like this, that's had like an amazingly fast, turnaround.
It got published almost 1 year ago before the COVID breakout. It's
Oh.
quite precarious and very predicting, foretelling novel. It's a very strange, and she's really one of its kind.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so it was, it preceded. Oh,
Yeah,
wow, that's incredible.
it's not the post-response novel. It got published 2 years, almost 1 year and a half.
And it's just strangely
Very
synchronicities.
strange
Yeah.
coincidence, like Che Jung's the synchronicity,
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I was like briefly terrified when I saw it because I thought that this person begun and wrote the whole novel.
I've written 2 poems.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's really amazing that this novel kind of anticipated or predated the actual pandemic. Ling Ma's Severance, I think is having like a similar like reception kind of in North America. Where people are like reading it and thinking, this is kind of weirdly anticipating what we're going through right now. And I think kind of that gets to, it's like an example of like the novelist being like, kind of out of sync with contemporary events, paying off in this kind of, strange, way. Yeah, wow, that's really quite amazing. As far as like, how I think about, my daily writing practice and its potential connections to what might be going on, thanks so much for that description of like picking up the different pieces. And that's something that I definitely think a lot about. And, in approaching, this kind of question of like, how do you find, meaning in a set of things that don't seem connected, then kind of a set of things that seem kind of, incoherently like disconnected. And, one of the kind of, underlying ideas of the novel is, looking at the strange ways in which, like, there is a connection between, like, the National Library in Paris and, and like the printing tradition in Korea. And my home of like Quebec, like growing up, like I kind of had the feeling that like the basic biographical details of my life, were just basically incidental, and it was just kind of purely coincidence. And one of the things that kind of I'm discovering, while researching this novel is that there's kind of like a reason why there is like a Korean diaspora, and there is like a reason why the National Library. In France, possesses like the copy of the Chukchi, and so even though like sometimes it feels strange to be working on this project that seems so like misaligned with kind of the urgencies at the time.
Yeah.
I do think that there are some like parallels or similarities in thinking about the way art can respond to kind of things that kind of evade or kind of like that seem to be like meaningless or kind of so too incomprehensible to kind of think about.
Yeah, I think your work is very. It should include some very excruciating personal wounds of relocation.
Yeah.
So many times.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But I think maybe the readers might see how we wanted to become a whole person by looking at our own wounds being relocated so many times according to the logic of your parents' future plan for the loving beloved son.
Yeah.
So I think it should be very painful for you, but I think it's going to be a very meaningful work for young Koreans, especially because I know in my neighborhood so many young people have to go to top schools in U.S. and UK.
Yeah.
They are going to Switzerland. They are going to U.S. So we are just hey, how's the study? And they are suffering from depression.